So you're muted.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Ryan Paul Johnson with the Fairfax County Department of Transportation, and I want to welcome you to this meeting to discuss the proposed Active Transportation and Trail Network, which was developed as a part of the ActiveFairfax Transportation Plan project. Before we begin, I would like to review some guidelines so that everyone can participate and get the most out of this section. Please note that the meeting is being recorded and will be posted on YouTube, then linked to the project webpage. Microsoft Teams does offer a live captioning service. You can find that by clicking the three dots and choosing Turn on Live Captioning. Once the presentation is completed, we will begin the questioning and answering portion during which participants will ask the questions aloud. You may also submit questions using the chat function at any time, and we will do our best to answer all questions while ensuring that we get to our participants. If you have multiple questions, this means that you will be placed back into a queue so that everyone has a chance to participate. If you're on the phone, please hold your questions to the end and we will have instructions on how to ask questions at the conclusion of the presentation. We also encourage to submit your comments to today's meeting using the online survey, online feedback form, or phone call. Again, we'll address those at the end of the presentation. Before we begin, I would like to present our presenter, Nicole Winings. Nicole is the ActiveFairfax Transportation Plan Project Manager and is an active transportation planner with the Fairfax Department of Transportation. Nicole?
All right. Thank you, Ryan Paul. Let me share my screen and pull this presentation back up. Great. Welcome. I'm so happy to have you all here tonight to talk about the ActiveFairfax Transportation Plan. The agenda today is basically focusing on the update of the planned active transportation and trail network. But I also want to give a little bit of a project overview and a status where we are since we have been now a few years into this project. So we're all caught up on what we have been up to the past couple of years and how we got to where we are today. And at the end of the presentation, I'm also going to give a very brief update on a secondary effort, supporting document that we have been developing at the same time as the planned active transportation and trail network, which is the Active Transportation Toolkit. And then, of course, we will have time for your questions and discussion. All right, so let's start with some background information about this project. What is active transportation? Let's start there, considering it's called the Active Transportation Plan or Active Transportation Network. So active transportation for this project means that it includes all forms of non-motorized or human-powered travel that can be both for recreational purposes or utilitarian purposes, just getting from A to B. And this definition does include micro mobility devices that are powered by a small electric motor, for example, electric scooters, electric bikes, or electric skateboards. It also includes modes such as hiking and equestrian travel. The purpose of the project is really to look at our current plans that we have for active transportation. We have multiple plans in the county already, including the Countywide Trails Plan map, as well as the Bicycle Network Plan map. The Trails Plan map has been around since the 1970s, so there's a long history to that plan. It was updated multiple times over the years. But its original vision is still very much included in this plan, and this plan does provide the basis for this update. So even though the name will change, the Trails Plan will remain basically the document that we update, and we're actually merging the Bicycle Network Plan into the Trails Plan and then giving it a new name. So there. And that already sounds complicated. So that's one of the main reasons we started this project, because there are too many plans. And Some of them have conflicting policies. It can be confusing for developers and also transportation planners to really, determine which plan to implement, because sometimes for the same location, you have 2, sometimes 3 different recommendations of what type of active transportation facility should be implemented. And then on top of that, we have for every activity center in the county, and we have over 30. Those are your mixed-use commercial centers, like Tyson's, Annandale, Springfield. Those have their own comprehensive plan that also has active transportation facility recommendations. So between all these plans, it was important to kind of take a comprehensive look, take a step back, and make sure that we create a document that doesn't duplicate any information, so that it points to existing plans that we're not addressing and take out information that was in conflict, so that we really only have one recommendation for each location, with information, of course, where additional guidance can be found for other areas that are not covered by this plan. So where are we in the project? So we started in 2020, just around the beginning of the pandemic. So we focused in the beginning at, what is currently out there, not just the plans, but also the infrastructure, the demographics, like where do people live and where do they want to go? Where's the need or the greatest need for active transportation? Where's the highest demand for active transportation? Where are the safety issues? So there was a lot of data analysis that went into that. Then once we finished kind of looking at the status quo, we did an initial community engagement period in 2021, where we asked the community, like, what are your thoughts on active transportation? Where do you see barriers? What is your vision for active transportation and trails in the county in the future? And that was a 3 months long, pretty intense engagement effort, and we got a lot of great information out of that engagement period, which we used to inform the development of the vision, goals, and objectives for active transportation in Fairfax County, which was endorsed by the Board of Supervisors in 2021. And here on the right, you can see a high-level overview of those goals. So the main areas here are access and connectivity, user safety and comfort, community livability and health, equity and social justice, and sustainability and conservation. And these goals have sub-objectives that go into a little bit more detail on our website if you're interested to learn more. But this is really like the guiding principle that we are using to apply when we are working on active transportation plans, including this particular project that we are talking about today. Then also in 2021, because of the pandemic, a lot of people were out walking and biking, but also fewer people were driving to work, which left our roads wide open and our speeds increased, and unfortunately also our crashes and pedestrian fatalities. So pedestrian safety became a really important topic politically as well. So our project was directed to develop recommendations for a Safe Streets for All program. So that we did that and completed that effort in 2022. So the board endorsed this program. However, we have not implemented the program yet, as we're still waiting for funding for the program. Just so if you heard, Fairfax County has a Safe Streets for All program, it's still in the works to this day. And then finally, we developed the bicycle parking guidelines. Those were an update of existing guidelines that were first adopted in 2014. But through a different effort the county was undertaking, which was focusing on updating the zoning ordinance for parking. It was called Parking Reimagined, if you were part of that effort as well. It did include a new guidance for bicycle parking as well, and that was no longer in line with our existing guidance. So as part of this project, we did update the guidelines to match the new zoning ordinance and add additional detail. And that was finished in 2024. So now moving to what we're currently working on. So of course, today we're talking about the update of the planned active transportation and trails network, which basically, as you know, we're doing the outreach. It's not finished yet, so it's still underway. Then the active transportation toolkit that we're going to briefly cover today, which is also on the website for review if you're interested. And then next, and we already kind of started working on that, but we haven't included this in the public engagement yet. That will be a separate effort in the spring. We're currently working on developing some programmatic and policy recommendations for active transportation. It's mostly to inform our work at FCDOT, but also other departments in the county moving forward to ensure that we work towards a safer active transportation legislation environment, and encourage folks to use the facilities that we have and do so safely. We're also going to work on implementation recommendations. That includes refining a project selection methodology. So how do we pick out of the many potential projects we could work on and fund? How do we pick the ones that are the most important? We have very limited funding. We have thousands of projects that are unfunded. So developing and refining the methodology to make those recommendations of which projects should move forward is a part of this project, but also coming up with the list of potential projects to recommend for funding in the future. And then at the end of this effort, we will develop a final report that will be posted to the website that kind of summarizes all the work. And that will be the end of the project, and that will probably be in mid-2025. And that will conclude the specific project, but it doesn't mean that the planned active transportation and trails network will automatically become the new policy. There will need to be a follow-on comprehensive plan update process that will probably take up to a year as well. So we're really getting everything up and the policies updated in 2026. So a brief look at what we heard from the community through our phase 1 outreach in 2021. This is a word cloud of the many comments we've received. We had pretty significant participation for a community survey. Over 1,200 community members responded to our questionnaire. And those are basically the concerns and the vision that we heard about most. And of course, connectivity stands out here as one of the major concerns and goals for active transportation, which is directly, of course, connected to the topic today, the network that really creates that connectivity. But also what stands out is the trails, bike lanes, sidewalks, so the particular facility types, but also supplemental, like the amenities that make walking and biking safer and more comfortable, such as lighting and trees, and of course bike parking at the end of the trip and at the beginning, wayfinding that may help, and traffic calming. So there are a lot of shared streets in the county, particular neighborhood streets that may not get specific active transportation infrastructure for a long time, but traffic calming is certainly a concern that's related to folks that are walking and biking in the street, often because there is no facility that helps make that more comfortable and safe. All right, let's jump into a look at the planned active transportation and trail network. So this was a multi-step process that took over a year. It's a very large county with a lot of streets and trails already. There are thousands and thousands of miles of road and about 500 miles of existing trails in the county. And then the plan network from the trails plan and the bike plan was, of course, significantly larger than our current existing facility network. And we had to look at all of those, of course. So having multiple plans it required us to merge all of these plans together on the data level. So this was the tech-heavy focus. We had to digitize maps and make sure that the line work didn't overlap and merge it together and make sure we don't lose that information. And then that helped us see, where gaps in the system are, but also allowed us to take a comprehensive look at the lines that were basically on the current plans. Do they still make sense? At that time, we did a pretty significant environmental review through our park authority and our stormwater experts that have all that data on sensitive environments and cultural resources that we don't even have access to as a project team, but making sure that any of these lines that conflict with those resources would be rerouted or removed, so we do not run into issues later on. And we also cleaned up the data. So if we knew if there was a line through Parkland, for example, where this didn't match an existing trail or planned trail, those were removed because the plan actually doesn't apply to parklands. So we cannot show planned trails on parkland, which is governed by their own comprehensive plans. And then in step 2, we started to add trails in where gaps existed. So that focus was particularly on, connecting to neighborhood destinations such as schools and parks and park entrances. But also, the land use has changed. So there's new metro stations and there's new commercial areas that may have not been there in the 1970s or even in the 1990s. So we took a comprehensive look at, where connectivity would need to be added. And we made sure to include those in this step before we looked at basically assigning any sort of facility. So at that point, it was just lines on the map. Those are routes, so active transportation routes that were really going places and connecting places. At that point, we also coordinated with landowners and surrounding jurisdictions to make sure we connected to networks around us and also within us. So there's some jurisdictions that are surrounded by Fairfax County that we had to make sure we connect to. And we looked at adding a land use map to the routes to really ensure that, we have that context sensitive look at, not one size fits all, just because, say a bike lane, for example, fits into an urban context, it may not be the best facility in a more rural context. Maybe a trail is better there. But in order to make that determination, we need to determine where those areas are and how they differ in their context. Then we started to develop a facility selection guidance. So basically thinking about, this one size doesn't fit all, like which facility should really be added along a really wide and busy road versus, a 2-lane neighborhood street. They have very different needs. So users feel much more comfortable on low stress, low traffic, low speed roads and may not need as much separation as are need next to an interstate or a really busy arterial street like Route 7 or Route 1. So we developed that guidance and wrote it down into a pretty complex matrix and applied that in step 3 to the network, but also taking the existing kind of planned trail network into consideration. So the original trail network from the 1970s did plan trails also along small roads because they were just really good connections between A and B. And the goal was to create a trail experience. So staying on a trail, not switching between trail and street too much, but taking advantage of the right of way that is along the street in order to, create that a holistic trail network. So in addition to, looking at a specific road and looking at what type of improvement would make sense in the context, we also looked at, the original trail network and make sure to maintain a lot of the recommendations there, many of which have been implemented at least partly already. And then we got everything ready, of course, for the public engagement. So this is where we are now. We started in August and we'll be wrapping up in December. So this has been quite a while. We had a couple in-person open houses in September and presented to community groups in October and went out to the public in busy locations like parks and at grocery stores and provided information to the public about this project. And once we have all the comments in at the end of December, we will, of course, look at all the comments and revise the draft network as needed. And then at that point, we are ready to initiate the comprehensive planning process, the amendment process. So in order to replace those existing maps that are in the comprehensive plan, there's a formal process we have to go through. And it also involves a public hearing at the end of it. So this is not the last time we're doing public engagement on this network. So there will be at a minimum a public hearing, if not additional public meetings. So you can see the updated network. And then finally, with board approval, it would become part of the comprehensive plan. So what is new and what has changed? So first I want to talk about what remains very similar to the current comprehensive planning guidance, particularly the trails plan. So yes, we still have a comprehensive countywide trail network that I previously discussed that includes it's a visionary network, so it includes existing routes, but also planned routes. So it doesn't differentiate what's already constructed and what's not constructed. So it doesn't change the color or recognizes that something is there. So if you look at the map, don't use it as a as a way to navigate around. We have a bicycle map for that. So some of these may not be constructed yet. Actually, a lot of them are probably not constructed, but we maintained that methodology to the plan. A little change we made is that the trail recommendation, in particular for the trail network, is now in the center of the street. So it doesn't differentiate which side of the street it should be on. And that actually half the supervisor districts in our current plan do not have that recommendation. So the first in builds it, basically. So if there's no trail segment along a road and a developer wants to develop their property, they're the first in, that's where it goes. But if there's already an existing piece, we would, follow-up developments would connect to that piece on that side. If you come in with a public capital project, we would actually survey the entire corridor and see where it's easiest to construct or where it makes more sense to construct, depending on utility impacts, property impacts, environmental impacts. So there are different ways of implementing this, but we're not, because there's so many complexities with it. It's better to say, okay, this is a trail corridor, but which side will be determined later. And in some places, you actually will need two trails if it's a super wide road, like Route 1, for example. We also focus a little bit more on the routes, like I said. So it's really about getting from A to B and along what corridor. But there's which facility works best sometimes has to be determined at implementation. So there's a baseline, okay, this needs to be a protected facility, it's a busy corridor, but it could be a trail, or it could be for example, a cycle track, which separates not just active transportation users from vehicles, but also from each other. So the bikes get their own separated facility, and the pedestrians do. So there's a little bit more flexibility and guidance here of, it's not, this is what it's going to be. And then, we go in and actually something else would have been better. There is a designation of local and regional trail routes. So that's really important, particularly from a implementation standpoint, to recognize which of the trail routes have that regional function that really connect. Route 7 connects Reston and Sterling, or Tysons and Sterling. That's a really important corridor. That should be a regional connection. Or Route 1 is an important corridor that's a regional connection. And there's federal funding available for regional trails that, in order to tap into that, we would need to have those routes designated as regional in our comprehensive plan. So very important, but it doesn't necessarily change the facility type. And finally, the network purpose remains, as I previously said in the introduction to what is active transportation. It has always been for the county since the beginning of trail planning and active transportation planning in the 1970s. It has always been a focus on transportation and recreation. And if you look at the plans and the routes, that becomes quite clear that it really has that dual function. And really, a lot of the active transportation facilities that we have today, even along roads that have clearly, this is where people go to access a metro station or a supermarket, but there are people walking their dogs and jogging, and we see up to 80% recreational use of those primarily transportation facilities as well. And vice versa, there are trails through open space that have an important transportation factor because it's a shortcut to, a school or a bus stop, because our road network is so broken up, like there are so many cul-de-sacs and whatnot. Sometimes there are trails that connect the cul-de-sac, so you can't pass through with a car, but you can pass through as a pedestrian or cyclist. So we also maintained the Stream Valley Trail Network, which is governed only by this map. And nowhere else, even though the definition of what those are is included in the comprehensive plan policy element in the Parks and Rec chapter or segment. And we did not really make many changes, if any, to the lines on the map that fall within the Stream Valley Trail Network, just because they're a very special category that I explain a little bit later, but they're not actually part of the real trail network, because sometimes they don't even include a trail. So they're really a special, separate entity that we need to treat differently. And this plan was not the one that we used to update that. That would need to be a separate effort, but it's still shown on the map. And then we also recognize that we do have a lot of cul-de-sacs and quiet roads in the county that do have a very important transportation factor. And those are the neighborhood streets, the residential streets, and we have hundreds and hundreds of miles where kids play in the streets, have their basketball hoops and ride their bicycles, and very few cars and low speeds on many of those. And they're really important for the network, and particularly the first and last mile. So connecting, your residences to the more regional or local trail network. Right, what is new? So what has changed? So one major change was the design user. So planners use a design user when we think about who are we planning for? And previously, in previous plans, particularly the bicycle map, MASA plan, used the design users that were between 8 and 88. So, which is great. That covers a lot of age groups, but what about the kids under 8? Where are the 4-year-olds going to go? Where are the, the parents that have infants with them? And, over 88, you still need to get around as well. And sometimes you can't drive anymore. So now we really want to focus and make sure that we plan for all ages and abilities and don't leave age groups out, which, absolutely makes sense. And particularly focus also on the community that may have some disabilities and needs special accommodations. Also, we are focusing more on safety. So particularly something called the safe systems approach, which basically means that we want to design the entire transportation system to be safer, not just for drivers, but for everyone in all users equally. And that sometimes requires, specific design treatments, but also changing the road in a way that it encourages, self-enforcing behavior, because enforcement can only go that much, education can only go that far. Self-enforcing roads that encourage safe behaviors from all road users is kind of the key here, and recognizing that people make mistakes and that those mistakes should ideally not be a fatal mistake. Then we also talked a little bit about that already, focusing more on context-sensitive design. So recognizing that the route on paper may go along a key corridor, but that corridor changes. It may pass through an activity center, through a commercial area, through a very natural area. So for the user, the volume of use changes. For example, if you're in a more rural area, you won't probably see as many people using the facility as you're in downtown Tysons, where you would need to design a little bit different to accommodate the number of users, but also the aesthetic that goes along with it. So a little bit more urban design of those facilities is desirable versus a more kind of rural design, park-like setting in more natural or suburban areas. And that kind of leads into the facility selection guidance that is shown on the left here. This is a high-level overview, just with icons showing the different type of facilities that are recommended depending on what road they're on and then in what land use context they are. So the community character from left to right is basically, going from lower density to higher density and basically residential to mixed use or commercial. And then from top to bottom is like the larger, busier corridors down to, your local streets, residential streets that don't carry that much traffic. And you can see just on the colors how kind of the recommendations change depending on where the street is located and what the condition of the street is. And the full Excel spreadsheet that goes into really the design details is available online on the project website if you're interested. And it's on the plan map as well. And this tool, this new guidance for facility selection is really key, not just to plan the network that we're showing on the map, but also any future roads or any roads that are not part of the network. So now all roads we have guidance for, which is something we didn't have before. So that was a really important gap in our planning guidance that we needed to fill. Another gap was pedestrian recommendations. So we have a few policies for pedestrians and pedestrian safety in the comprehensive plan right now, but there were definitely some gaps that needed to be filled. For example, until very recently, there was no guidance on how many crosswalks should be at an intersection, which seems to be a pretty basic thing to have, but it wasn't included. And it's not yet included in the county guidance, but in the state guidance that was just included, which was a very important step forward. But there are other guidance, for example, how wide a pedestrian facility should be, how frequently a crosswalk should be spaced. Additional recommendations that go a little bit beyond the state guidance are definitely needed for an urban area like Fairfax County. We also added, for the first time, complete streets recommendations countywide. So complete streets basically means, of course, accommodating all the different type of users, your transit users, your drivers, your pedestrians, your cyclists, from a bare facility standpoint, but also adding, that extra, so the amenities that really encourage people to walk, make it a lot more comfortable, such as street trees to give you some shade, some protection from rain, but also just like a much more pleasant environment, lighting at night to make it much more comfortable and safe. So those are elements of the complete streets that are not currently included in our countywide planning. It is included for certain activity centers such as Tyson's and Reston. They do have very particular standards already where the landscaping or streetscaping is enhanced, as you can see if you go to those places, but outside of those areas there wasn't any guidance, so it adds some policies on in that to help with developing more of those comfortable streets all over the county. And finally, I mentioned that already, but the better connectivity to daily destinations was something we really focused on. There were some significant gaps in the previous network or the current network that we're trying to update, and particularly affecting schools and also parks. Those were not all connected to the network in the current planning. So now I would like to introduce you to some of the different facility types that we have in our toolbox, basically, for active transportation planning. So looking at the pedestrian facility types first. On the left is just, your standard sidewalks. We have lots of those. We like to see it a little bit wider than the previous guidance to allow, people with strollers to pass each other without having to step into the grass, or people in wheelchairs to pass each other, or just walk as a group or a couple together. So just a little bit more space makes those facilities a lot more comfortable. Then we have enhanced sidewalks. Those are particularly in urban or more urban areas. So those are much wider, but also have that an enhanced surface, for example, sometimes pavers, not as common anymore, but if you see, some more commercial areas like Annandale and whatnot, they use pavers there, even though there are concerns about, that those are not as comfortable and friendly for folks with disabilities. But it was used in the past, and it's really has a very different aesthetic to it as a more standard concrete sidewalk. And then on the opposite side of that scale, something a little bit more park-like, a little bit more rural, is a pedestrian trail. Those are, a little meandering, a little bit, and they're usually asphalt instead of concrete. They can be concrete, but primarily asphalt. But they're not not a mixed-use facility. They're a little bit more narrow than what we would like to see as a mixed-use, so a bike ped facility. Those are really meant to be just more rural sidewalks. Now looking at bicycle-only facilities, these ones are on-street with no vertical separation from traffic. So on the left, there's a standard bike lane. We have lots of those on our streets, and on the right is a buffered bike lane. So it's that standard bike lane with a little bit of a extra stripe buffer to vehicles. Moving on to more separated bike facilities. So on the left, we have a one-way on-street cycle track. So you can see this one is protected by a concrete barrier and parking. And then you can see to the right of that is where the sidewalk is, just outside the picture. So very comfortable facility, and the green marks a conflict zone, a driveway entrance where drivers have to cross. So this is a very, very comfortable facility. To the right is an on-street two-way cycle track. So again, you can see how this was basically built in the street. So this is street level, but there was a concrete curb added between the cycle track and the street. And this one is just on one side of the street in both directions. So the previous on-street one-way cycle track has a counterpart on the other side, usually. I don't think it's actually in this pictures because this may be a one-way street, but for a two-way street, you would have just like a normal bike lane, one in each direction on each side of the road. Then moving to the third picture, this is an off-street one-way cycle track. So again, there you would have a counter facility on the other side that goes in the other direction. This is at the sidewalk level. So the curb is to the left. It was built kind of flush with the sidewalk, but separated with some landscaping and some treatments on the ground to show where, you know, the pedestrian area is and where the bike area is. And there's also on-street parking that buffers the cyclists here from the traffic. And then all the way to the right, it looks nearly like a street, but it's a bike-only facility. This is also two ways, so only on one side of the street, but this is an off-street two-way cycle track at the sidewalk level. So the sidewalk would be to the right. And that's important to note that a cycle track is only a cycle track when there is also a sidewalk. Otherwise, it would be a shared facility, but these are really bike-only and pedestrians have their own space. Let's take a look at less separation. So these are the low-stress shared streets that I mentioned we have a lot of in Fairfax County, like the one on the left there. That's a very typical neighborhood street, very few cars, 25 miles an hour, kind of posted speed, but often people go slower just because it's, you know, the neighborhood setting, and there's the kids on the street and cars parked on the street. And many of these streets don't need many enhancements, sidewalks sometimes safety signage if needed. Wayfinding is really great here because those are sometimes key routes to schools and parks, but it may not be known to someone that's not living in that neighborhood. And then in the middle is a neighborhood greenway. That's a slightly enhanced shared street. So those always have sidewalks. But they have traffic calming and speed reduction elements to really bring down the speed differential between vehicles and cyclists that are using the street. Ideally, those would be posted at 15 miles per hour and would have some design interventions to, you know, really slow down the cars, but also, you know, add that additional complete street element, like where the green comes from. So the trees and bump outs or enhanced landscaping, maybe some pedestrian lighting to make the route just much more comfortable for active transportation users. And then finally, the pedestrian first street. This one shown in the picture is a commercial type, but they also have residential types, and those are streets that are primarily really, you know, the pedestrian is king, but cars are guests. So cars can still enter the space very, very slowly. And it needs to be designed that way that it's clear, like, okay, this is a space where I can drive to my parking spot, for example, but it's really designed more like a pedestrian space. We also have multi-use trails. These ones are all along roads. So on the left, we have what we would call a standard multi-use trail. It's designed for fast travel speeds based on state design standards and federal design standards. So those are usually 10 feet wide, asphalt, very easy to bike on, and quite wide. And then in the middle here, we have a trail that's quite different. It looks a little bit more like the pedestrian trail we looked at earlier, but it's wider. So this one is at least 8 feet wide. It's a multi-use hard surface trail designed for slow travel speeds. So it doesn't allow for the really fast through movement, and it does that through some design interventions, such as the meandering you see here, but also in general, it just doesn't feel like comfortable to bike on really fast. So those are often used in addition to a 10-foot. So you have like the faster facility on one side and this one on the other, or if there's just not enough space to put in the faster facility, or you're in a neighborhood where you have a trail route go through, but you really the road next to it is actually quite comfortable for the faster cyclists, so they're going to stay there while beginners can use this facility. And on the right is a new facility. It's called an urban trail. It's very important for us to have that in the toolkit because we don't have necessarily the space to do the super urban facilities in all the environments that we have. So the urban trail is basically similar to the enhanced sidewalk and having these special treatments and the more urban aesthetic, but it's wider and specifically designed to be multi-use. So it is designed to also accommodate cyclists similar to the other two trails on this slide. All right, let's take a look at the multi-use trails to open space. So those are the areas that are not necessarily in parks. So there's a lot of open space that is outside of parks that could be a utility corridor or a land that belongs to the Board of Supervisors or the Board of Education. Or just to connect to neighborhoods within the same subdivision. So we have a lot of those as well, which are often on private land, but publicly accessible. So on the left, again, we have the multi-use hard surface trail designed for fast travel speeds. And then the multi-use hard surface trail designed for slow travel speeds. So very similar design guidance to the ones along roads, but in a natural setting. But here we also have the option to have multi-use natural surface trails, which are, of course, a lot cheaper to construct, less impact to the environment. So that's really important, a new important, or new again, important trail to have in our toolkit. We didn't build those for quite a while, but now they can be built again. And that's really great to have. And then finally, we have the opportunity to elevate the trail on a boardwalk. This, unfortunately, this is not the silver bullet to save all the issues that we have with trails through environmentally sensitive areas, but in very limited applications, it may make sense to elevate the trail for short segments to bridge something that would really have a detrimental impact to the environment if you would just pave over it. So it's a good option to have. So looking at the symbology we're using for this map and all these different type of facilities I just talked about, they all are kind of grouped into categories. So like I mentioned earlier, because we have that design flexibility now, we don't have to assign every single facility type to a road. So they're more grouped by high level, like by high level group, umbrella group. So in purple, those are the kind of trail routes along the streets. In green, those are the routes to open space, and the light blue are the routes to the neighborhoods. And then in orange are routes that are actually governed by other plans. So those are the activity centers that I mentioned earlier. Those have their own active transportation plans. So we include a number here that corresponds with the number in the comprehensive plan to make it easy to find. But we do provide the regional and local designation here. So the thicker lines are the regional lines. and the skinnier lines are the local connections in order to have that ability to apply for funding for those particular grants and kind of show where those routes are for planning purposes. So looking at these in more detail, again, these are the urban network routes in orange. And as I mentioned, they are in the activity centers, and that's why there is no particular group assigned to them, because that really depends on what those specific plans are calling for. But to provide really high-level guidance for the areas where maybe there is no planning guidance, or it's pretty outdated planning guidance, or to inform future planning efforts for those areas, we provide some just very high-level categories. If it's if the road is a multimodal through corridor, you may want to consider, cycle tracks or an urban trail. If it's a local street, you may need to look at the facility selection matrix to determine, how many cars are expected on the road or already on the road, to determine what a potential facility could be. The trail network routes along roads are shown in purple, as I mentioned, and those really are supposed to provide comfortable active transportation facilities and connections between destinations and two specific key destinations along the corridor. And the typical facilities for those would be multi-use hard surface, one or two trails, depending on the road, for designed for fast travel speeds. In very low density areas, it's more common to have a slightly narrower facility because there are fewer users. So that's another option. And of course, you can always go higher, like have that higher level cycle track, in particular when it comes to interim facilities. So for example, if you have a really wide road with few cars on it, you may actually want to build that facility, that cycle track, into the road. So you could take, convert the outside lane to a cycle track, similar to how it was shown in the images, and that's a lot cheaper to implement if if it doesn't impact traffic. So we have done these type of road diets where travel lanes have been converted to buffered bike lanes all over the county, and if those are upgraded with vertical barriers, for example, those could be quite as comfortable as a trail. And not every facility has to be built behind the curb. So that saves a lot of funding without compromising necessarily how comfortable and safe the facility is. So the enhanced neighborhood routes are mostly the blue lines through the neighborhoods. And the base facility here, kind of the most common, is the neighborhood greenway with the sidewalks and the shared street space between vehicles and bikes. But that said, if the road is so wide that a bike lane could be striped, we do those by policy, pretty much as part of repaving. So if the road is too wide that it fits a bike lane, we want to add the bike lane just it helps calm the speeds, provides that extra comfort for cyclists, but also organizes that street a little bit better. If it's so wide, we do see issues with speeding through neighborhoods and whatnot. So it does help. So there are other things that it really depends on what the road is like, depending on the volume of cars that go through and kind of just the design of the road to see what the right treatment is. So it really depends on a case-by-case basis. The trail network routes are shown in green, the kind of medium green, and those are really key to connect all of our neighborhoods and all the 300, 500 miles of trails that we already have. So as you can see on the image on the lower right, those are really important to create those connections between a residential area and a school, or between the residential area and another residential area, or get people to transit or an activity center through a a natural corridor. So instead of having to go all the way around through the roadway that sometimes is sometimes many miles longer and can take a lot longer. But it's also, this access to nature, convenient places to, just get out and enjoy and recreate and walk your dog and go for a stroll. It's really important for public health and mental health, as we know today. So those are not just in our parks, but also outside of parks and on open space lands. So a quick word on the Stream Valley Trail routes. Those are shown in a more kind of military or olive green. Those are on purpose co-located with environmental quality corridors, which are basically most of our streams in the county. And that's done in order to protect those streams and the land around it, and protect the wildlife and habitat and the biodiversity, and the aesthetic values of those stream corridors. So they're basically green corridors that are, sometimes I say it's called a real estate vehicle. So they are regulated by the Park Authority, and sometimes they get easements or even acquire the land through this designation in order to protect it from development. But it doesn't necessarily mean that an actual trail will be built there for humans. In many areas, there were trails built where the Park Authority saw it as appropriate. Sometimes they're paved trails, sometimes they're natural surface trails, but it doesn't mean they're part necessarily of the trail network. So they may not actually ever include a trail for humans. Sometimes they're just a wildlife corridor. So note on implementation. So this is a visionary network. So there's no dedicated funding available for implementation, and you can imagine, how big the need is depending on where you live in the county. You see that what we have on the plan is not necessarily matching what you see on the ground, and there are a lot of neighborhoods and areas that have only a sidewalk and no trail or nothing. There's no facility at all for active transportation users. It will probably take a significant amount of funding and time to implement a lot of the recommendations. However, when funding becomes available, we are using the methodology we are having in place and are refining to prioritize projects for implementation. And then when we have the funding, it's really important to have this updated comprehensive planning data available and recommendation available to know what we actually, supposed to build in order to fit all the pieces together to create that vision. Currently, trails and sidewalks cost about 10 to 15 million a mile. So just to give you some measure of scale of how expensive it will be to upgrade our current network. So we need to build whatever we build. We need to build the right facility, but it does take a while, even if we get funding. Usually it takes between 3 to 5 years on average to implement the facility. So there's a lot of design and planning that needs to go into those utility relocation, property acquisition sometimes, and unfortunately there's no very quick way to enhance the network. There are a few interim improvements we can make rather quickly, such as striping bike lanes as part of repaving or adding crosswalks as part of repaving. So we're trying to do that as much as we can, but implementing the full vision of an adequate and comfortable active transportation network will probably take a lifetime for the size of our county. Right, a quick look at the active transportation toolkit that should help our public and private transportation planning efforts. So again, really important that if we are improving our streets, it's really important that we do it correctly in order to get the biggest bang for our buck, but also not to waste money on a facility that doesn't work or doesn't really fulfill the need. So we developed this document in order to provide additional guidance to know how to plan and design active transportation facilities to ensure that what we get is actually meeting the needs of the community. This is mostly going to be an internal document, but it will be public on the website for anyone that would like to learn more about active transportation planning and design. It's over 100 pages long. It's very technical, but we welcome any comments if you're interested, want to take a deep dive into all the issues and resources related to active transportation planning. This is on the project website, and we're welcoming any thoughts that you would like to share. This will not become part of the comprehensive plan, so this is not going through the comp plan amendment process, but it's going to be endorsed by the board before we can use it, and then it will be available on the website, similar to the bicycle parking guidelines. So, all right, so now we're really curious to hear, I've talked a lot, shared a lot of information, what your thoughts are. I'm sure you had an interest in active transportation or trails that encourage you to attend the meeting today. But before we get to kind of the open discussion, just want to share the ways outside of this meeting to provide feedback. So you can let your friends and neighbors and family know, or if you would like to share feedback, not as open here, but you would like to actually look at the map and leave comments or fill out the survey. So you have three ways to submit feedback afterwards. So again, we have the survey, which is available at https://engage.fairfaxcounty.gov/F8367. You can also leave a comment using the interactive network map, and that's at www.fairfaxcounty.gov/transportation/bike-walk/ActiveFairfax, or you can call us at 703-890-5898, project code 7268, and you can leave a recorded message with your comments. And all of these resources are open for feedback and comments until December 20th this year. Right, and I give it back to Ryan Paul.
Thank you, Nicole. All righty, so we have now reached the point where we will take questions and comments from our attendees. You may ask verbally by using the raise your hand button. I would unmute and enable your microphone, and then you will go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question or leave your comment. Once you have made your comment, definitely go ahead and mute yourself back. If you are on the phone, press *5 to raise your hand. And then whenever I call upon your number, you'll go ahead and press *6 to unmute yourself. And then once you have finished with your comment or have asked your question, you go ahead and press *6 again to mute yourself back. You may also submit questions in the chat, and we will answer those as they come in. Okay, let's see. Okay, so first question is going to be from a comment from Heath Henning. I'm going to allow your mic, and you can go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question, Keith.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
We can hear you.
Okay, so main comment I had, because I've been looking at the map, and I know you talked about how you did it by route type, but to be honest, as somebody who's a cyclist commuter, I really care more about facility type. And so that's one, when I look at the map, I'm like, okay, this is somewhere between a truly awful network and a, biker's paradise network. And I really have no idea where it's at, because I'm not totally sure what the facilities are. So that's one where, like, if all those purple routes are cycle tracks and separated trails, well, then that's a truly great network. But if we're just painting stripes on the ground, that's a truly awful network. And so that's one where it's not clear to me what to make of the map. And so that's one that I think you guys could improve when you put together your plan. is to put together the type of clarity to understand what it is. And even if it's some kind of a range, I mean, the main thing really, we just want to know when we're, as a cycle commuter, we just want to know that we're going to be separated from traffic. And so if we can be separated from traffic, either on a cycle track or one of those separated trails, that goes a very long way. And so that's one where if you can make that clear that that is the minimum standard for a regional network or something like that, that would make things a lot more clear and would probably get people more excited to push the board to give you guys more funding. Because I know you say it's like 10 million per mile, but that's not that different than it takes to add a new lane of traffic. And if we just shift the funding over, and we have plenty of money, we just got to figure out how to claw some of that away from the road folks. So that's my first question. I'll stick around and I got more.
Right. Thank you. So that's a very good point. And I just want to clarify that if you only look at the interactive map, it doesn't include a lot of that additional information on the facility types. I definitely recommend reviewing the PDF map that also has the full map notes, as well as the facility selection toolkit on it. So within the map notes, it definitely specifies, what facilities fall within each category. So for example, the purple lines, the trail network, it specifically says it has to be a multi-use trail or cycle track. So that's a base standard. So you can choose between the two depending on what works, but the base is like the separation from traffic. So hopefully that addresses the concern that it's not just going to be stripes and that would fulfill the comprehensive plan. That won't be the case. It's actually a step up from our current guidance that did allow or recommend bike lanes on busier roads, and those recommendations will be revised to make sure it really meets the needs of all users, including children and beginners. So the only routes where you may see a shared environment is the light blue through neighborhoods. But that also is with the caveat, like we really actually need to double check the route and look at the conditions, and if the minimum conditions are too high and not met, like you will need to provide a better facility. So that's where the selection toolkit comes in. So the toolkit kind of, you have to see, how many cars on this road, what is the speed, how wide is the road, how many lanes, and then it gives you like a very narrowed down kind of baseline of this is really what you want to aim for. But within that, you may have 2 or 3 facilities to choose from. But the comfort level should all be very similar. Thank you.
Okay, we have some questions in the chat. The first question is from David Duffy. What power does FCDOT have to have roads built in these standards? My understanding is that VDOT owns and controls all roads, and they don't have to listen to anyone since they have the money and the power.
Yes, thank you. Good point. So yes, all the roads, most of the roads in Fairfax County are owned and maintained by the Virginia Department of Transportation. So the role that the Fairfax County Department of Transportation plays is we actually build a lot of the facilities within the VDOT framework. So we provide the funding, we provide the design, we work very closely with VDOT on refining the design to meet all their standards. So VDOT has a road design manual that we need to follow. We can request exceptions and waivers to that, but overall we would need to stick to kind of just the general state guidance that's available, which is heavily leaning on the federal guidance. So that limits us a little bit, particularly when it comes to crosswalk enhancements. We have to follow very strict VDOT warrants for certain crosswalk treatments, what's really popular right now is a rapid flashing beacon. So like the blinky lights, people always email and ask for the blinker lights at the crosswalks. So VDOT actually has very specific circumstances that they want to see where those can go. So they can't go everywhere. So we have to always look at, the volume of cars, number of lanes, and this posted speed. Those 3 items is really what drives a lot of decisions on facilities. But when it comes to, is it a shared use path or a sidewalk next to the road, VDOT doesn't really have an opinion. as long as whatever we build meets their guidance. We do have some flexibility. For example, if we want to build a pedestrian trail or a shared use path designed to county standards, the county can do that, but VDOT won't maintain it. The county would need to maintain it. So even though VDOT maintains all the roads, a lot of the active transportation facilities are actually maintained by the county for that reason. So it's a challenge, but we are working around it, and we have greater flexibility than, so enough flexibility to implement what's in the plan, but we don't have a complete flexibility such as an independent city like DC would have.
Okay, we have another question from Mitch Huber, excuse me. Has the county considered the use and possible extent of VDOT's Appendix B2 process established multimodal zones to better implement treatments in denser areas?
Yes, so the county has a memorandum of understanding with VDOT to implement what we call urban street standards in certain areas. For example, Tyson's is one of those areas. The Innovation Station area is one of those areas. And that gives us basically a set of design factors that are exceptions. So it's basically a package of all these things you want to do that we usually need to ask for a design waiver every single time. It just is a blanket agreement or like a kind of pre-agreement that we can do those things, like have a narrower, like a narrow curve, like the radius of a curve can be a little bit more narrow, or we can narrow the lanes a little bit more. So there's certain more urban design to those roads that are covered through that, but we don't have that countywide yet.
Okay, we have another question and comment from David Duffy. I agree with Keith's comment. I use a bike as my means of transportation, and on a 2-mile stretch, there can be 3 different types of bike lanes and different, even on the side of the road. There is no consistency, no continuity, and even the borderline useless painted lanes get abandoned at every intersection. The current environment is downright hostile to everyone not in a car. You are saying good things, but what is the execution going to be?
Well, we hear you. We wish we could build better, faster, and really countywide. So the bike lanes you see, for the most part, nearly all of them, there are few exceptions that were developed by put in by developers. Most of the bike lanes are actually striped as part of the maintenance program that VDOT has. So VDOT comes in and repaves the roads, creates a blank slate. They ask us, do you want bike lanes anywhere? We're like, well, since you're repaving anyway, we can narrow the lanes here. We can try road diet there in order to make the roads safer for all users. We're fully aware those are not necessarily great bike facilities, and hopefully we never pretended that they are, but they are making the roads safer. The narrower triple lanes will help reduce speeding. We're creating an extra buffer for pedestrians that wasn't there before. Crosswalks should be safer because cars are kind of more limited of where they're driving. So it creates a little bit of some areas where pedestrians won't need to worry about a car as much. Of course, some bike lanes are quite usable by cyclists, not all of them. Yeah, unfortunately, they do get dropped and sometimes they're too close to cars. But the overall benefit of restriping the roads as part of the efforts are happening anyway, so it's very little cost. Some design work, pretty much, and some paint. But we're not going out and spending millions on having the road repaved and just to put bike lanes down. So those are the capital projects, and we plan those. Usually that's where we build, the shared use path and the crosswalk enhancements and traffic lights and whatnot, the big buck projects that have to go through a very different process. So think of the bike lanes more as an interim kind of traffic calming measure, more than an attempt to really build out a bike network But in many routes, it really has helped. We have seen increases in bike traffic, but yeah, they're not perfect.
Okay, I see that Keith Kenning has his hand raised, and I'm going to go ahead and allow your mic, Keith, and you can go ahead and ask your question.
So, a little bit of a side note. So I've talked to some of the engineers from the Northern Virginia VDOT subdivision, and they seem to generally be on board with this stuff. They said through the repaving, they've basically gotten all the low-hanging fruit, and now they're starting with the hard stuff. They seem to generally be on board with it, and it sounds like they are not as openly hostile to the idea as things may imply, and that if we tell them we want more active transport infrastructure, they're generally on board with it. Now, that kind of ties into, you've mentioned road diets a couple times. Is that one where if we say we would like a road diet in this area and we want to take away a lane so that we can instead replace it with a cycle track, does VDOT say, no, not if it might impact traffic? Or do they say, look, if you guys want it, we'll figure out how to make it happen? How does that interaction work? And I guess what kind of levers do we have to push to say, no, we are willing to potentially impact traffic if it means that we can get people off the road and onto the cycle track? And I guess the follow-up to that would be, in their calculations, do they take into account any potential cars that would be taken off the road by putting in better active transport, because people just wouldn't drive those trips? They would bike for them instead. Because that's one where, since we know that adding lanes doesn't make traffic better, it would stand to reason to also think that removing them probably wouldn't make traffic worse. So I guess my question is, so how does that look with VDOT, and what kind of pull do we have to remove lanes? Because I think of, like, I live in Tyson, so I think of like crossing Route 23, Route 123, we get the 30-second timer, and it is a hustle to make it across that in time when you got to cross 12 lanes of traffic. And that's one where I know that's one they go, oh, well, that's a busy road, we need all those lanes. And I'm just kind of like, yeah, I don't think we need that much.
Yeah, I think you're starting to hint at how complex road diets are. So it really depends on the road, and it's a case by case. So that we have some general guidance and parameters that we're working with when we look or try to identify potential road diet candidates. So the spacing of signals, for example, is important. How many vehicles use a road each day, and if they're all going at the same time, or if there's like this crazy peak or stadium arrival where there's just like a lot of cars that need space at the same time, or it's really spread out throughout the day. But we're looking at roads under 15,000 vehicles, which actually is quite a lot of traffic. But in general, the federal guidance is up to 21,000 cars a day. A road diet can still work pretty well or even improve traffic flow. But that said, it's probably not a route that has a lot of lights on it. So road diets are particularly efficient and work really well when it's a corridor that doesn't have a lot of traffic lights. Maybe at the end, but not necessarily in between. So we have done over 40, I think at this point, 30, 38, 40 road diets very successfully. We haven't removed one yet. They all work really well because they met all those criteria that we have worked with VDOT to establish. And they have a huge safety benefit. So that's definitely something that VDOT is aware of. They actually developed a whole road diet guide in order to encourage other areas outside of Fairfax County to do more road diets as part of repaving. So they're even offering technical services to help smaller communities with the analysis, because they may not have the resources to look at what are the traffic impacts. We do have to do, of course, some planning work, and not every road diet will work. Not every road will function as, the general public would still expect in a suburban area, if we just take that lane, right? So we do have to be a little bit careful and look at, what road works. But we have so many overbuilt roads that we have plenty where we were able to road diets, and so far, the community has really supported it, and we do get requests a lot from the community to road diet certain routes. We don't get approval for all of them. Even if we feel it may work, VDOT is a little bit more conservative than us, and they're like, well, we maybe wait and see if there's lots of development coming in the area, or there's this is like a very important emergency route, or a if this highway gets clogged, this is where the cars need to go. So they do take a more system-wide look at their traffic flow, which is really what they're kind of focusing on as part of their work and mandate. So it's a give and take. So, but it's complicated, but we're glad to have done so many, and we're definitely one of the leaders in the United States on having implemented road diets, and lots of credit to VDOT on having worked with us on that.
Okay. We have a comment in the chat from David Duffy. I'm aware of the resurfacing project that has its own issues, where they will add lanes on one road, but then it dead ends on another road where they resurface but don't put it in bike lanes. The road I use the most has been repaved twice in the time I've been here, and has been on a bike ride plan as long as I've been able to determine, but it does not happen.
Do you mind sharing what road that is? Because there may be reasons, and sometimes, because we do have to maintain a certain width for vehicles, we cannot narrow a lane enough to fit a bike lane. But sometimes it also, the road gets added to the repaving schedule so late that we no longer can go through the design process. So it really depends. Some roads fall through the cracks that way, and we just have to wait for the next cycle to come around. But sometimes it just didn't work. For some reason, we looked at it and it didn't work. And we also have a limit of how many roads we can change in their design each year, because there's a limited budget to how many designs can be done by the consultant. So we try to estimate ahead of time. We probably want to change 20, 30 roads every year. But then if there's like another one that comes up later, we may not be able to include that in the contracts. So that's kind of like the technical reason. But if you would like to share the specific route you're talking about, I may be able to get back to you with a more specific answer on that one.
Yeah, so they said Franconia Road, it has bike lanes on one side of Van Dorn, but not the other after that. Okay. But Franconia Road is well.
Yeah, sometimes they also just get paved halfway. So they because it's a maintenance program, right? So maybe one half got repaved before, and it doesn't need the pavement. Or it gets patched in a way that it doesn't allow us to change the striping. Or maybe the road narrowed a little bit. Our roads in Fairfax County are very inconsistent in their width. So maybe that's where, the road narrowed too much in order to fit bike lanes. But we usually try to scan every single road that comes on the paving list for potential striping improvements. And then we have to prioritize where we can.
Okay. Raise hand. Okay. And you can go ahead and unmute yourself, Keith.
Like I said, if nobody else will raise their hand, I got plenty of things to talk about. So you mentioned that the VDOT standards largely come from the federal government. So with Mango Mussolini coming back in, I have serious doubts that those are going to improve. And so the first question I have is VDOT able to set better standards for those road diets? And then my tie-in is, you talked about how when they say it's 1,500 cars or less, is that per lane? Because that's one of those things where I look at somewhere like Route 123, where, I mean, you're going to get a ton just because of the amount of lanes there are, but is it more just about the total amount of cars coming through, or is it based on the number of cars per lane. And then that's one of those things where you could find that maybe they don't actually, there's a ton of cars coming through, but there's so many lanes that it doesn't matter. And you could just knock out a lane and they would all just bump down to narrow lanes and still have free flowing traffic.
Right. Yeah, both. So let me answer your first question. So the good and the bad news is that changing federal standards takes a very long time, 10, 15 years. So it's not as affected by administrations as one would think. It's more the bureaucracy that stands behind these manuals and the effort they have to go through, and they're working with all the different state DOTs, and it's just this massive undertaking. And then I'm not even sure they got thousands of comments on it that they have to work through. So the general trend on the federal level is pretty progressive and has been for many years, no matter who was, the administration. So I think the trend will remain positive. And then the states don't have to adopt all the guidance, that they can have their own, but they try to stick closely to it. And the reason behind that is because a lot of the funding they get for particularly maintenance of roads is federal. And if they don't follow the federal standards, they're at risk at losing that funding. And that's why they're so concerned, among other reasons, like why, they're strict about how we construct, and what standards we follow when we do construction. That was that one question. Second question on the lanes and the volume. So it's usually the whole corridor. We don't really have the data per lane on a high level. I think we have it in our kind of traffic models and the synchro and all that. We don't need to, we do go into that detail when we have a specific concern. So we have done road diets, for example, where we actually kept two approaches to an intersection. Just throwing one example out, Colts Neck Road in Reston at Sunrise Valley Drive actually has two lanes approaching the signal because the traffic model showed that was needed in order to make it work. And it has just one lane in the other direction. So there's definitely data that goes into that. But in general, kind of high level, when we talk about the guidance, that's also included, going back to the map we were talking about tonight, the facility selection matrix actually does have, if you look at, your road context, and you have your 4-lane road with 3,000 cars on it, there's a little note that says consider road diet as one of the treatments, because you do want to give the implementing kind of designer or planner the hint, like you don't have to build behind the curb necessarily. Like this is a pretty wide road space that has lots of excess capacity. This may be a great candidate for road diet, and you may be able to save a lot of funding to implement it by just converting underutilized travel lanes. So really it depends, but there is some high level guidance on, just in general, this is a busy corridor. But sometimes it is very much, the commuter traffic that goes forth and back. You have most of the volumes like in the morning and then in the afternoon, instead of kind of equally, like in a street grid in an urban downtown, you would have a very different travel pattern than you have on a major kind of commuter arterial into a city. Did that answer your question?
There we go. I was about to type it into the chat. So yeah, that was very helpful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, our next question or comment from Daniel DeCoco. I'll go ahead and allow your mic, and you can go ahead and unmute yourself and begin your question or comment. Daniel, are you able to unmute yourself? Let's see.
you may be able to make him a presenter to enable the mic.
Okay, you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Ah, there we go. Can you hear me?
Yes. Go ahead.
Excellent. So one of the stated goals and many of the comments that you received in your comment periods was connectivity. And I see a lot of strides being taken towards that with the map and everything. And I'm looking at the interactive map right now, actually, and it's very fun to work with. But a huge part of connectivity is safety at intersections, especially for the on-street facilities and bike lanes and stuff like that. And I guess I'm wondering it's often the case that the bike lanes just kind of peter out as we approach intersections, and they can be quite scary because of the geometry of the intersections and how it enables cars to turn quickly through them with like really sweeping radii. And I'm wondering if this plan accommodates for or plans for better, safer intersection treatments, more like Dutch design intersections, or if that's something that the state handles, and that's why we don't see many of those being implemented around our county thus far, and where the responsibility lies for that. So I guess, are we thinking about that? And if so, who is responsible for it? If you could talk about that, that would be great.
Sure. So it's not on the map, so that's more of a detailed kind of design implementation guidance that's included in the toolkit. So I think what you're referring to are protected intersections, for example, that would guide a protected bike lane through the intersection without having a mixing zone. So similar to the safety of a signalized crosswalk, it would be a specific signalized bike crossing that doesn't conflict with cars. So there's some guidance in the toolkit for that for the implementing designer. But we do actually have projects in the works in the county where we are proposing these off-street separated cycle tracks, including those protected intersections. The pilot project that's funded, that's currently going through design, is in Reston on Sunrise Valley Drive between the Fairfax County Parkway Trail and Monroe Street. And that's where the facility is actually going to be built within the roadway. So it's moving the curb in instead of out. So leaving the existing sidewalk in place, narrowing the travel lanes, narrowing the median, and keeping the four travel lanes that they are, but really adjusting every inch, like using every inch of that right of way to add protected bike lanes that have protected intersection design along, I think, multiple intersections. But actually, the pilot will only have 2 intersections, but the entire project, which is 3 phases, would go from Edmund Haley Drive in Reston, near Reston Parkway, all the way to Innovation Station. And I think it includes 6 or so, give or take. So basically any intersection along that route would have a protected intersection. We also have 2 other similar cycle track projects that are currently on hold waiting for funding. One is Town Center Parkway in Reston, and one is New Dominion Parkway in Reston, where it's all, the innovative design treatments. And we are working closely with VDOT on making all of that work. So far, so good. So far, we're moving forward with the design treatments as envisioned, following best practices. It's more a question of finding the funding to implement the general project, unrelated to what it is. It's just our projects that just have gotten very expensive over the past couple of years. 2 factors outside of both VDOT's and Fairfax County's purview. Just the global cost of construction has gone through the roof. So we were definitely working on that, and we're excited to have that opportunity hopefully soon to implement a pilot. We have done a little bit of a protected intersection in the interim cycle track on the north side of the Vienna metro station. Vienna Station Boulevard, and going all the way over to Oakton High School. That was actually a interim cycle track implemented and designed by VDOT, with the green pavement at conflict areas, and guiding, having the green crosswalks or cross bikes, as they're called, at the intersections that are very, very specific to those innovative facilities. So we're moving in the right direction. It always takes a little bit longer working through a capital project and those innovative facilities, but they are supported by fellow standards, or at least VDOT has endorsed NACTO standards. If you're in the field, you know what that means, but it's basically, it's not really a official federal or state guidance documents, but it's kind of like a group of cities that has come together to provide design recommendations for urban streets and bike facilities, and VDOT has endorsed that. Not everything in it, but we can use it to help design our facilities, as long as the federal standards and the state standards are not completely updated yet. So we can be creative, but it is a process to work through.
That's great to hear. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other question?
I'm sorry, I was muted. So sorry. So we have a question from David Duffy in the chat. It says, does someone have to advocate for each stretch of road that is being repaved, or does FCDOT do something to establish a network outside of specific requests? Or is it what this transportation plan is trying to establish? Do I misunderstand the goal of this? It seems to be both a design guide or a route plan at the same time.
Yeah, it does definitely have that double function, like specifying the routes in the map, but also providing the design guide for routes outside of the network. So the routes that are just in gray. So the facility selection toolkit can definitely be applied to any road in Fairfax County, which is a new thing. We haven't had that before, and it's really important because, of course, every route should support active transportation use. So that's where kind of like the higher end, high level, 10,000 foot level plan comes in. For the repaving, that's not necessarily part of the comprehensive planning process. That's more of a separate, because it's maintenance. Maintenance actually doesn't have to implement comprehensive planning guidance. VDOT works with us because they like to, they don't have to. In our comprehensive plan, staff is directed to work with VDOT on screening all the roads for potential road diets and bike lanes, and where we can implement them, we will. As long as, within the constraints of the system and financial, as I discussed earlier, we can only do that many roads, but staff scans everything. If there's a specific route that you would like to bring to staff's attention for the future, just in case it comes onto the paving list, like it looks like it's in bad shape, or it was recently repaved and didn't include anything, you would like to see something in the future, you can definitely bring that to our attention. We make sure to keep an eye out when that road comes next on the paving list. But it's not the nature of the process is very fast moving, and also somewhat secretive. So we can't publish any of the roads until they're basically finalized. So that's all an internal process. Originally, before we started adding bike lanes, VDOT actually didn't even have any public engagement on the repaving. They just paved whatever they thought was the most in need. They have a very intricate analysis of and ranking of which road to do and how to prioritize. We just get in the end the list of this is what they're going to do, and then we'd go quickly through and see where we could potentially make enhancements. So it's a interesting process, very different from a capital project or a comprehensive plan. So this comprehensive plan is focused more on implementation through development, as well as capital projects. So there's just policy guidance on, if the road is wide enough, add a bike lane in the interim. However, that's not like the ultimate facility in most cases. The ultimate facility is in the facility selection toolkit or in the map if it's part of the trail network.
We have someone with a hand raised. Okay, Keith, you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
So, I mean, I'm hearing a lot of good stuff, and it sounds like for the most part you have good ideas that align with what most people want here. You just can't get the money for it. So I guess my question is, who do we gotta harass to get you guys your money? Because it seems to me like that's a lot of what it's going to come down to. So I remember when I commented at the county budget in the 5-year plan, I think they were going to dedicate $200 million to bicycle pedestrian infrastructure, but $1.6 billion to widening roadways. And so that's one. Is this something to get you guys the money you need? Do we got to go to, is that board of supervisors, or is that FCDOT, where the board of supervisors basically gives them a chunk and they say divvy it up? Because a lot of times when I've contacted FCDOT, they're like, oh, you should contact our active transportation team. And it sounds like you guys basically agree with everything I'm saying, but you guys can't get the money. And I think they're kind of missing the point where like, yeah, give them the money to do what they want to do. And so who is it we got to talk to get y'all some more money?
But yeah, so most of the active transportation projects in general in the county are funded through the Transportation Priorities Plan, which is bond funds. If you voted, you may have seen there was a transportation bond on there on the ballot this year. Those are the funds every 6 years that we get for transportation. However, I think that particular funding I've heard went to the metro mostly, so that's what the state used to fund transit in the area.
That was the metro one.
Yeah, so that's also like we're competing not just with road widening, but we're also competing with very important, very costly transit infrastructure in the area. So it's a give and take, and we get a lot of funds for active transportation, while other communities don't get as much, but we just have a huge need. So even if we get 100 million, which is great, through the board of supervisors, they have set a goal to raise 100 million for active transportation over 6 years, while we're waiting for additional bond funds to come down the line in 2030 or later. Again, the costs of the project is so high that we can mostly do small scale improvements right now. So crosswalk improvements, small sidewalk gaps, small trail gaps, which help build out the network in specific areas that already have facilities, but doesn't necessarily help build the regional network or the longer trail connections, the pedestrian bridges. Those type of projects, we either have to ask for grant funding from the government, the federal government particularly, or smart scale funding. So there are ways to finance it, but it's not that like the scale of the need is just so big that it will take a long time. But yeah, it's really the bond funding. Once we start that process again, where we can add new projects, which may be a very long time from now, but keep an eye out for that. And that's where we chose, for example, in 2014 was the last big transportation priorities plan, where we had 250 active transportation projects, give or take, on there that were funded with a significant amount of money. And those were bigger projects too. So the ones you see built today that are larger, those are still from 2014. But they're so expensive now that we still have used the 2019 funding, for example, just to add, like to actually have enough funding to implement the original projects. So it may take some time, but through this project, we want to kind of develop, the methodology and how to really pick the right projects for the limited funding, but then also have a list of key priorities ready to go and vetted through the public process by the Board of Supervisors, that when we get more funding, that we can say, okay, these are, priorities to move forward with.
So
But yeah, funding is always a struggle.
I guess my follow-up will be, is there a way to get more bond funding on the ballot? Like, is that something that we can do through ballot initiatives? Is that something that it just the board says, hey, let's throw this out to the public, or how does that work?
Yeah, I mean, there are other creative ways. I'm not a funding expert, so I'm probably not the right person to ask. We do have a coordination and funding section within FCDOT that you could give a call and discuss it in more detail. I've heard that idea floated before, but I'm not sure what the opportunities and process would be. But there are, without raising taxes, I mean, you can always raise a penny for pedestrian safety was something that was floated years ago and not approved. So that, there's ways to fund things that are different from outside our current process, but that does take some creativity and political will. But it would need to be a significant amount to really make a dent into the needs that we have today.
Okay, we have a question and comment in the chat from David Duffy. Will this plan encourage or require those sorts of inner neighborhood connections that were mentioned? When developers build subdivisions around me, they provide no way to get between them that forces us to use arterials instead. I suspect there is no realistic way to add them now since it's all houses.
Right. Yeah. Unfortunately, if it has been precluded by developers because there was nothing in the comprehensive plan at the time, there's really no way to rectify that without the neighborhood themselves encouraging that, so that they can provide easements and work with the HOA to make those connections privately, because it's all private anyway. But in the plan, it's important, to show the connections that can be still made. And then when the developer comes in, they will need to either implement the connection or request a waiver. So there's a waiver process that can go through, and it needs to be, scrutinized by staff and our trails committee that is a community organization that is appointed to advise the board members on those type of decisions. So we rarely see those waivers approved, but sometimes there's a good reason why it gets approved. So that's why this plan is so important, because if a development happens and you don't have it on the plan, it's just not going to happen. If you have it on the plan, at least there's a good chance that we will get the connection in some shape or form.
Does anyone else have any other comments or questions for us? Yeah. Okay. I'm not seeing any more hands or questions in the chat. We are getting thanks in the chat. Of course, thank everyone for showing up and being here today, for sure. As a reminder, Nicole, do you want to go back to the page with the ways to submit comments so people can see that visually also? As a reminder, you can submit your feedback by December 20th, 2024 through the survey there at https engage.fairfaxcounty.gov/FA367, or leave a comment using the interactive map at the project website, which is www.fairfaxcounty.gov/bike-walk/ActiveFairfax, or give us a call at 703-890-5898 with the project code of 7268 to leave your recorded message with that. Also, for more information on the project itself, to review the Active Transportation and Trail Network Plan and also the Active Transportation Toolkit, you can also visit that project website, which is once again https://www.fairfaxcounty.gov/transportation/bike-walk/Active Okay. So this concludes our meeting on Active Fairfax Transportation Plan Project. I recorded once again, this meeting will be available on the project website in about a day or so. Thank you all for joining us tonight, and we really appreciate your time and participation.